we're across quite a few time zones today. So today we have three incredible educators, and it seems like, like Chantal said, to have three of you. We hope one day face to face, but at least we're fortunate to get you all together for today. And I think our objective is today is to unpack your passion, what you do, and also to discuss the impact of what our current situation has on teaching and learning. So I'm going to start off with just a question about who and what you are as an educator. And like for all three of you, and I'm saying this from someone who has read your books and has been to many of your webinars, the work you do is much more than work. It's a passion of yours, and you are such strong advocates for these ideas. I would love to hear a bit more about really what got you into these respective areas, and really how your passion developed. I'm going to start off with Ron, if you don't mind, with this question.
Um, when I became a teacher, I think one of the reasons why I became a teacher was that school never worked for me. And so I really wanted to kind of create a classroom that was different, that was kind of more engaging. And, very quickly, I kind of realized that that was about getting students engaged with the ideas, and that meant getting them to think. And so I began to kind of investigate that further. And my first kind of forays into that was really to focus on metacognition and developing that kind of metacognitive sense. And that kind of quickly expanded to thinking about the dispositions as a whole and what did that kind of look like. And so from that, then kind of the research I did has always kind of been grounded in that idea about, developing those dispositions. And I think I was also struck by a realization that schools put so much emphasis on tests and on scores and on rankings, and what really prepares kids for life is that development of dispositions. And when you think about what a good school, whatever have in your mind as a good school, students leave those schools with a set of dispositions that they carry forward into the world. And so it was that kind of, from my own background, really wanting to kind of broaden what education might look like for students.
And you have, just so you know, I've seen, I look at the impact you've gone internationally. It's, I think you've been very successful in promoting those dispositions. Kath, would you like to add a little bit about your passion and how you got into this area of inquiry?
Sure. Thanks. What a lovely question. It feels a bit indulgent to be able to talk about this. I mean, for me, I think I was really fortunate that when I did my initial training, and I'm not going to say when that was, but let's just say it's a long time ago now. When I did my initial training at the University of Melbourne, I happened to land there at a time as a undergraduate teacher where I worked with a team of really phenomenal educators that were pioneering, the academic staff were pioneering integrated approaches to curriculum. They taught us in a way that was really inquiry based. So I was immersed in it. I didn't go from my own schooling into a university situation that was kind of more of the same. I was confronted with a different way from the get-go of learning. So I was so grateful to, and I bet there'll be people in the chat, in the audience, that will know the names, especially if they've been in the Australian context, of people like Marilyn Woolley and Keith Pigden, who really planted that seed. And then I think, again, I was fortunate in that when I began as a teacher and I worked in the primary setting, I don't know, it just felt so right, so natural to engage with children as inquirers. I was very heavily involved in the environmental education movement as a young teacher. I still am, but in a different way. And I think that, but spending a lot of time with children in the outdoors, bringing a strong focus on learning about and for and in nature. Again, there is no better way to see the power of inquiry than when you're connecting kids with a natural environment. So I've got to say, my passion and my interest is Sure, I've researched the area, I've written about it, I've done all of that. I've spent 10 years as an academic, but the thing that keeps the flame alive for me is spending time with children. I I mean, I challenge anyone to to spend time with children and not see the power of inquiry. So that's what keeps it burning for me, is the
Mhm.
kids themselves.
And you know what? Even when you talk about it, your face lights up. You know, no, seriously, it's
I,
it's genuine. You know,
yeah,
because you.
that's actually just my ring light,
Oh, I'm
Nancy.
so sorry.
Just
Yes, never
yeah,
mind. Do you
because
know?
I'm an influencer now. I've got a ring light, so yeah.
Don't we all? I bet mine. We all have it now. Mark, I would love to hear about you as well now in terms of your passion and really how you got into this area.
Sure. My journey started in the classroom, as did Ron's and Kath's. I came from a family of teachers, and so it wasn't a far cry for me to become a teacher. And my mother, maybe she had a big influence on me early on, because she was the curriculum director for our district at home, our school corporation, and she was really thinking a lot about big ideas and casting students in a different kind of light, other than just having them work through worksheets. And so my university training, Kath, was just the opposite of yours. Mine was,
Yeah.
to be a teacher, it's about filling out the lesson plan and which worksheets are going to use with the students. Um,
Mm.
and uh, and my mother secretly told me, don't do it that way.
Oh,
and
go, mum.
yeah, yeah. So she sent me to a lot of some innovative conferences as my graduation present, because she's like, you're not going to teach those kids like that. So I knew that I didn't want to be a teacher that was just giving kids
Mm,
work to do and
mm,
worksheets and things like that. And I knew I wanted to, school to be a different kind of experience for them. But it really was when I was in international schools, and our
mm.
school at the time got connected with Harvard University's Project Zero, where I came across the path of that. Well, I'm going to point to him here. That's where he is on my screen. I don't know where he is on your screen. Is that where he is? Ron Ritchhart and some of his colleagues, Louis Hedlund, Steve Seidel, they were working with having a small project with some international schools in Northern Europe at the time. This is the late 90s, around this idea of teaching for understanding. And I went to that week
Mm.
workshop, and they kept talking about understanding. And I thought, I'm not getting this. My I'm making sure that my classroom's fun. My kids are pretty happy. I'm teaching them. They seem to be. What does this mean? Why are they talking about understanding so much? So my first experiences with that guy down there was actually a little frustrating. But I thought, there's got to be something I'm not
Mm.
seeing here. And when I stuck with the struggle, I think that really was a defining moment for me, because then I started thinking, well, what is understanding? I knew I
Mm.
could get kids to do lots of things, but if it didn't stick with them, if 2 weeks later they didn't recognize when, how, where, why to use that in a new situation, then was that really understanding? And then I began to really question, had I just created lots of illusions of progress along the way, where I got kids to do things, but it didn't stick. And so thankfully, my frustration with that guy down there didn't last. We've been friends for, gosh, it will be coming up on 25 years pretty soon. It's our anniversary, our silver anniversary, Ron. We can,
Oh, yay!
I see lots of places we could go, all these people in the
Yes.
chat from all over the world. But
Mhm.
how I became curious about how children really learn. And
Yeah.
then that also transferred into my colleagues. What does it mean for adults to learn something? And that's the passion that keeps driving me, really understanding how other people are making sense of ideas. That continues to fuel me to this day.
And just so you can really look at the number of people who are here today, obviously your passion has resonated. It's a global impact. You three are a global impact. Think of it. I love that. We're just gonna a new book, Global Impact, by the three. This is a perfect segue to really the next question, in that Shauna was able to get all three of you here today. And I'd love to hear from you. How do you see your work connecting to each other? I don't know who would like to start. Maybe I'll start with Kath this time in terms of that.
Okay. So many ways, I mean, before I met both Ron and Mark, I would hear of them constantly because I would go into a school. I'm seeing you've had the same thing, you
Likewise.
know. Yeah, I'd go into a school and they'd say either, oh, we just had Ron or we just had Mark here for some workshops a few months ago, and they kind of said the same thing about that, or that you were coming. So I'd get this sense that, I mean, I knew anyway, but that we tended to work in the same schools. So there was an obvious, people recognize that we were kind of part of the same, if you like, family of educators and thinkers, and we could all reel off a list of a whole lot of others that are in this family. And I was thinking about this question, and I'm just going to say a couple of things. And firstly is that I think the big connecting piece for me is about culture. It's about that whether we're kind of putting the spotlight on thinking or whether we're putting the spotlight on a process of inquiry, our work has in common this notion that the culture of the classroom needs to be such that it positions our students as active, competent, agentic learners that feel that what they are learning has power for them both now and in the future, and that they are building their capacity as learners, and that teachers themselves. Also, it's just connecting to what you said before, Mark, that the culture of the school is, you know, we will borrow that phrase, a community of inquiry, a thinking community. And I think that, you know, when I look at your cultural forces, Ron, I read those and think, yes, 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 yes. That's those forces are at work and need cultivating for an inquiry stance as much as they do for growing that thinking. It's actually, our work feels like two sides of the same coin. It's kind of hard to go, there's this and there's this, isn't it? When you suggest it's all woven together. So I think that, and I also think that we share a common, you know, when we think about what the purpose of school is in 2021, what is the purpose of these places we call school? My hunch is we would say the same things. So I think at that very big picture level, we have a lot of connection. And then the final thing would be that at a more kind of pragmatic, perhaps practical level, of course, the work you've done around the thinking routines and dispositions has added such a beautiful layer to the work that I do. So when I'm just going to say, yesterday I was working with the staff and we began the day by tuning into our thinking, trying to activate, how do we understand and see this thing we call inquiry-based learning? What did we do to make that thinking visible? A give one, get one routine. So, you know, to be able to use those routines to help make the thinking visible, which then allows us to inquire more deeply into our learning, is such a gift. So I'm so grateful for what your work has done to really complement and grow my own thinking.
Nice. Ron or Mark, you want to continue that thought?
I'll jump in a little bit and then pass off to Ron. You know, one of the things I too, Kath, have heard your name out there. Kath's been here, and or Kath is coming, and quick, everybody look busy. No, that's not what they say. But no, so and often being told to me by teachers who I have a great deal of respect for, people who are often you know, thinking about their students and what their students are capable of and where they locate themselves in that. And so people that I was really respecting were mentioning Kath's name over and over and over again. So getting my antenna up, who is this Kath Murdoch? And it's been a delight to read her work and to have gotten to know her in some way here. One of the things that I think that Kath does really powerfully is she helps people think about the role of the child. And, you know, what role are we casting our students in? And that strikes me as very powerful. And I think that connects a lot to some of the things that Ron and I have just written about in our in our latest book, The Power of Making Thinking Visible, just whatever role that a person is cast in the most, that's the role they get good at, right? And so Kath is constantly casting or asking teachers to think about what role are they casting students in as an inquirer. That you just heard her say it, taking on an inquiry stance, and I think our work kind of gels into that. What kind of thinking moves does an inquirer make when he or she is really trying to get to the bottom of something or get towards something, if you will, that the process of learning. I'm going to say one other thing, Ron, and then I'll be quiet so that you can say a few things. I think another connection too is also not only the role of the student that Kath, I keep saying Cass. Cast is the word, but Kath is the person. Kath gets teachers to also think about the role that they themselves take on as well. When they're planning for inquiry, what do we see and notice here? What connections do we have to this? What are the different angles that we could come at this? She thinks a lot about the intentional planning for inquiry and gets people to really take on those thinking moves in their planning and their intention for inquiry. And I think that's another place where our work really coincides. She's getting teachers to do the very thinking moves that are going to help them be inquiry teachers.
That's true. Yeah.
Ron, did you want to say something? I'm sorry, Nancy.
Well, I'm not sure what more I can add. Those were a lot of kind of great connections from you. I certainly, agree with those big connections in terms of thinking about the role of the student, the role of the teacher there. And I guess maybe just a slightly different slant on that, still echoing that is the idea that learning is this very active process.
Yeah.
That it's not something that we can deliver, and so much of, our education that still goes on is teachers delivering the content. And I think that, we don't approach learning that way. We approach learning of, it's all about that engagement with ideas rather than the delivery of information, and how then to engage students so that, again, that we as the teacher aren't doing all of that work, but we're, helping the students develop those skills so that they are kind of more independent thinkers, more independent inquirers, that they can move things forward on their own. And then also what Kath said in terms of, just thinking about the culture of the classroom. I think that if you were to walk into, a classroom that's been, heavily influenced by Kath's ideas and doing that inquiry, or a classroom that's been heavily influenced by, visible thinking things, they're not going to look dissimilar. They're going to look very, very similar. You're going to see, the same kinds of actions by the students, by the teachers, a really very kind of active, thoughtful role. And I guess one other thing to add onto that role of the teacher, again, lots of schools treat the role of the teacher as being, they are the deliverer. And then what happens in terms of professional learning for teachers is they get trained. They get trained in how to do a new form of delivery. And so I think when Kath is working with teachers, when Mark and I are working with teachers, we don't talk about training. We talk about immersing them in a set of ideas, growing it, and we try to mirror exactly what we want teachers to do in the classroom. We mirror that, for the teachers that we're working with as well. So I think that our approach with teachers is also very, very similar in terms of, we know that we want teachers to experience what we're talking about. We want to make sure that we are walking the talk and we are engaging, because when teachers feel it, when teachers recognize, this is what's different here, this is what it feels like, to really be engaged in inquiry, to be engaged in building understanding, to be engaged in deeper learning, then they can carry that forward. And you can't train your way to that kind of being in the classroom.
Well, it almost goes back to what you were saying originally, Ron, about the disposition. You have to get the teacher's dispositions also developed. And I think one of the most powerful things I've seen just within my school is Ron and Kath, you've been in Luxembourg, and just the continuity of having you there for a week and then coming back again, and getting those relationships with the teachers and them living what you said, Ron, about they have to feel that idea of the thinking and experience it themselves. The drop in, drop out PD doesn't work, but just having that sustainability is what really makes that impact as well. This actually goes great to another question with everything that you're doing with your work, creating cultures of thinking with teachers, promoting inquiry in the classroom. What are some core ideas or principles that you found yourself constantly coming back to within your work? And I think this time I'll start with Mark.
Okay, I'll take it. Constantly coming back to, I was still reflecting on what you were just saying there, Nancy, in terms of teachers experiencing, what it feels like to, make their thinking visible and to take on an inquiry stance. So I guess that maybe, that opens up a thought for me over here that, creating a culture of thinking or promoting inquiry in the classroom, for me, isn't something to be done. It's something to be. That made sense in my mind. I don't know if it's making sense as it comes out of my mind. But I guess sometimes people, like schools, can easily go on. It's been coined out there. Someone's coined idea tourism. Live with this idea, take a few snapshots, move on to the next site. Go to that idea, take a few snapshots, go on to the next site. And I think that I can say this for Kath's work and our work too, that it's our goal would never be that years from now, people say, oh, really being interested in students' curiosity and inquiry, paying attention to kids thinking, oh yeah, we used to do that. We used to do that when we had another school head. We used to do that when Kath came around. We used to do that when Mark or Ron worked with our school. That's totally the anti-goal for us. Because making our students thinking visible, promoting rich, deep inquiry where children are capable of pursuing that's not something that's just done and checked off. It's something to be. It's a stance, it's a positioning. And that I come back to that quite often.
Ron, your thoughts on this? What do you keep on coming back to within your work? Certain principles or ideas?
Certainly one of our really kind of core principles is that learning is a consequence of thinking. So, we're teachers, again, are so used to, planning lessons from the content perspective. What's the content I want to get across? And, of course, there's content, but for students to learn that content, we have to then think about, well, what kind of thinking do they need to be doing with that content? So to get teachers really in that mode of constantly paying attention to the thinking. And then I think the other really, big one is just the importance of culture. That, I like to say that, any lesson, good or bad, any curriculum, good or bad, any unit plan, good or bad, will sink or float based on the culture of the classroom. And so we often don't spend a lot of time helping teachers understand how to create that culture. And so when you've got that culture, you also have a lot of grace, I think, with your students. You can try things out, you can make mistakes because they don't expect you to be perfect. They don't expect learning to be perfect. And they're there with you. So it's so important that we pay attention to that culture.
I love the word grace. That's so elegant, just that way, just the essence of that word. Kath, what are your thoughts principles that seem to keep coming back?
Oh, there's so many, and that word grace is just kind of, I almost need to sit with it for a moment, because I think it speaks to a lot of what we both try and do, but also what we need in bucket loads at the moment, where I've actually just had the experience this morning of just looking at it at some, I'm not even going to call it discourse on Twitter. But I guess what I would say is the lack of grace there, and how the lack of grace stifles growth, and growth for all of us. So bring on the grace, bring on the intellectual humility, bring on the openness and the listening. And that, I guess this comes back to something that I hold on and continue to hold on to all throughout my work. And that is this notion, as Mark has said, of truly having an inquiry stance, being an inquirer. I don't know how many times I would say a week, inquiry is not a subject. Inquiry is not something you do on Thursday afternoon and Friday morning, just like we don't do thinking routine time or whatever. These are ways of being. Sure, they have a collection of techniques and strategies and routines as part of them, but essentially this calls us to be an inquirer, to be someone who brings, I guess, that other key word for me that I come back to is to be curious. And I don't mean curious just as in full of awe and wonder. I do mean that, but also to be questioning and skeptical, again in a respectful way, but to be questioning, yes, to be curious. So curiosity, an inquiry stance. I think the other kind of core principle for me is actually about collaboration. And the book I'm working on at the moment is about personal inquiry. And it's so interesting, the more I work on it, the more I see this lovely connection between the I and the we, and that collaboration, both educators collaborating with each other, but that in order to inquire deeply and in order to take action, in order to do something powerful with our learning, we have to cultivate curiosity and collaboration. That social construction of meaning and ideas is so powerful. So I've got a few C words in my list here: curiosity, connection, collaboration, and stance, which is not the C word, but still, I'll think of one that would, character maybe. Yeah. But it's interesting, isn't it? You know, the things that you find yourself saying every workshop, you know, would be: inquiry is a stance for me. Inquiry is a way of being. We can't do learning to students. They are the ones doing the learning. We want to design for learning, so they will be doing more of the heavy lifting, more kids thinking more of the time. These are these phrases that just are part of what we do, and they echo, I think, some shared values.
No, definitely.
I'd like to connect on, could I, Nancy, connect on a little bit with
Go
Kath?
for it. I'm going to go rogue right now. No.
Yeah, let's go rogue.
Well, well, you were asking about the connections between our work and then also these core values. And I was just thinking as Kath was talking now, it's like stepping back as a classroom teacher into that role. You know, give me a curriculum, you know, give me all the bullet points, give me 180, 190 school days, and give me an empty classroom, and I'll get through all of my lessons very efficiently. I'll get them all done. But I don't teach an empty classroom, you know, and I don't teach a curriculum for that matter. I teach children. We teach human beings, and human beings have ideas and they have thoughts, they have perspectives, they have capacities. And I think that's another convergence of where our work comes together. And I think it's probably a value that we keep coming back to. It's like, who are we teaching? Being curious about who's in front of us and making space for that is something I keep thinking about and coming back to as well. Because again, if I had an empty classroom and had the curriculum, I could get through all of this very efficiently, but we teach humans. And so I think our work, both of our sets of work here, really create space for humans to have a place.
Oh, I think Ron had I wrote down something that Ron said I just love. Learning is a consequence of thinking. And imagine if you constantly have that mindset. It's, to me, that was so powerful, just hearing how you articulated that, Ron. And I think now this past year, following up on that, I guess I asked Ron this question to start off with. Following up on what we just heard, what have you had to do differently or to rethink during this past year, just looking at the events that's happened on a global scale?
Well, I mean, like everyone, we've had to, make a lot of adjustments. I think that, I mean, one that kind of comes immediately to mind, I mean, the book that Mark and I wrote, The Power of Making Things Invisible, came out, right as the pandemic was starting, right as schools were shutting down. And one of the big things that we wrote about in that book was about listening, about how important it was to listen as a teacher, and then to be on this format of at a distance when, what we were writing about was the kind of listening where you can be right beside a group, you can listen into them, and to really say, well, well, we're going to be talking about listening, of how important listening is. So how do we listen when we're in a Zoom classroom, and how do we help to make sure that learners feel that their voices are present, that they are being heard, that those ideas are in there. And so it's looked different, and we've had to be, I think, probably a lot more intentional about the listening. And you know um, you know one of the chapters I know that kind of Mark headed up, he talked about planning for the listening. And, you know, I have to admit that probably because I have focused a lot on listening, I was no longer at the point of planning for listening, because I was in a groove about that. But once I was online, I feel like I really had to plan for the listening. I really had to say, here's where I need to be listening. Here's where I need voices so that I can listen. And so that's been different, just to think about how that plays out in terms of focusing on the listening. So that's been a big one, I think, for me in this.
And Kath, what do you think? I mean, it's been such a year for educators this year, and you look at, I think what Ron said is so powerful. We have to listen even more, even with a virtual context, looking at working with our kids. What do you think in terms of differently approaches that would help, that you find helpful at this time?
Well, I mean, I should preface anything I say by acknowledging that the experience here in Australia pales into insignificance compared to most places around the world. And even though I'm in the state that had the longest period of lockdown, it's still nothing compared to what a lot of other people have gone through, a lot of other teachers. I'm working with teachers in some overseas schools that have been doing this for a year, that have been teaching their remotely for an entire year. I can only begin to imagine that. So we've not had that same intensity and length of time where we've been having to work in remote ways. But of course, it has changed profoundly the way that I'm working. And I'm in an interesting space at the moment where I'm experiencing both side by side. So this week I've been in actual schools working with teachers and children for every day. But I've come home, and at night I've been working with some of my international schools online. So I'm being reminded of the challenges, the benefits and so on of each. I guess one of the things that I would say that this whole experience has done, and I've written about this on the blog, but I think for many of us, it's actually for the first time in a long time activated. We talked before about the teacher as inquirer. For so many of us, being thrown into this emergency response and having to do things differently, while that's been really hard, and I don't for a moment dismiss the challenges of it, I think there's been some benefits for us in its woken us up to what it's like to be learners and to be challenged and to be pushed out of our comfort zone, and in fact to have our children being the ones that are saying, no, that's not how you do it like this. Well, why don't we? I've had lots of examples of where the teachers have really been humbled by the expertise of their students in the online space. So at a bigger picture level, what a beautiful reminder that in the classroom, everyone is a teacher and everyone is a learner. And for some of us to be reminded of what it feels like to be vulnerable, to be having to take a risk, to learn something new, And I think that's been powerful. And I think it's continuing, that we're in this kind of adaptation period of time. And that, as I say, I feel like that's woken up the learner within some of us, when perhaps we've been forgetting that the best teachers are also people that are conscious learners at the same time. So that would be something I think we could tap into.
Nice. Mark, what do you think? Anything you had to rethink to do differently this past year, or approaches that you
No,
would?
no, not at all, Nancy. I haven't thought.
It's
It's just been like it always was.
we're still going shopping, going to restaurants, no mask, no.
No, well, but you didn't know my life before the pandemic. I was just a lonely single person just sitting here, and I still am. No.
You have us, your virtual buddy.
Yeah. Well, as both, I'd like to just say a little bit. I know you've got other questions for us, but I guess I also just as everybody's been mentioning, this has just been a tough year. And I think it's important to acknowledge that a lot of people who are listening in right now, it's just been extraordinarily difficult. And I just want to give a shout out to the people who are still putting blood, sweat, and tears into all they're doing to provide really great experiences for their students in really, really difficult circumstances. So I'm just really amazed by that. And I would hate for us to not acknowledge that and hear that from our lips to your ears every day. When I see people getting down and exhausted, people are only human. I get that. But I find myself in some conversations with teachers thinking, well, remember kind of what's important to you. And I think about that for myself as a teacher in this capacity. It's like, I believe that, learning happens best when it's driven by kids' inquiry, kids' questions, right? Well, I still believe that. COVID didn't take that away from me.
Yeah.
The challenge is, how do I lean into that value? How do I live into that value in whatever form I'm teaching? I believe that learning unfolds in the collaboration of others, really drawing on that thread that Kath put out there around the collaboration, right? My ideas have to brush themselves up against others' ideas, and it goes somewhere in the learning. Well, that COVID didn't take that away from me. I still hold that value. I just have to figure out how to live into that value. And so it has been tricky. And that's really the understatement of the year. I realize that. But when people can pull back to, well, hearing kids' voices, understanding kids' questions, getting kids to build on each other's ideas, learning begins at the point of challenge. This is another big principle in our cultures of thinking and action work. Well, then how do I create the conditions for that to happen even in this space? And so it really has been a year of thinking, well, what is important? And then how do I make that work?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, looking at the visible thinking routines for many of us, it was translating them to a virtual context, some had challenges with the technology. Technology started becoming the hindrance rather than thinking about the thinking that you want. And don't worry about the slide deck, or just get kids in a room. You don't have to have this. Ron, I don't know if have you had experience with teachers asking you, what is the best practice that I could do right now without people getting so overwhelmed? I hate to say it, the technology, and just focus on the thinking.
Definitely challenges, and definitely, trying things out in terms of what will work around the technology and what routines, are, adaptable. We have several that I've been, this is the thing with routines. I always try never to pigeonhole a routine. Like, people will say, oh, which routines work really good for, early childhood? Which routines work really good for math? Which routines, will work with technology? And every time there will be a surprise. Someone will take a routine that I had not thought of, do it with early childhood kids. Someone will take a routine that I thought was mostly a language arts routine and do it in accounting. And the same thing with technology. There have been routines that I thought, like, I'm not sure that this will really work online with technology. And then
Mm.
someone does it a really interesting way. And it's kind of like, wow, and so, yeah, and it would be, I understand the desire to kind of want that handed to you I mean, I love it when people share those ideas with me and I can do that. But it is a lot of invention. It's a lot of kind of figuring out, but it's also, and I think where that comes from, that ingenuity of where people figure it out is they realize that the lesson they're planning is not about the routine.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the thinking that they want students to be doing with this particular content in order to make sense of this. And they keep their focus on that. And then, they recognize, okay, well, how do I modify that? How do I structure that? What's that going to look like? But they're always clear. Here's the thinking I'm after.
Mm.
And then they make their adjustments around that. And I think that's what guides people in terms of making those adaptations, of being able to see, oh yeah, although, I heard about that routine from an English class, I want that same thinking for my kids in my accounting class. And so I can make that work with these little changes. And that's where it always comes from. So keeping the eye on kind of where's the thinking that you want students to do. And then, the routine is a support for that thinking. It's a scaffold for that thinking. And so when it ceases to be a support and a scaffold, and it's a hindrance or a rigid frame, that's not the intent.
Right. Well, you said
Can I go rogue?
go rogue. We want rogue. We're to the end. So now
Because I'm hearing you going, yes, me too. I want to, because everything you've just said about the routines, I want to say that is the same when in terms of this notion of a cycle of inquiry. It's not, it doesn't matter how many times I say it, it's not a recipe, it's not rigid steps that you've got to go through. That those elements of that process don't exist completely separately, but what it does offer is a support for the kind of thinking, the kind of learning, the processes that we move through as an inquirer. So I think of the routines in a similar way, that the cycle of inquiry can also get misappropriated as a kind of, I'm just going to say it, a recipe or a rigid structure. So we've talked about this before, and it is one of those challenging things about, on the one hand, providing that support, and on the other hand, helping people understand the nuanced, complex layers that sit behind it. And it continues to be a challenge. I think there's something in the idea of that at times, starting with these kinds of structures, scaffolds, whatever we want to call them, initially people kind of are in that space and then gradually start to understand, oh, okay, I see. Now I can let that go, and I can use this much more organically and naturally, and I can play with it. And we know that that's a fairly common kind of trajectory for a learner. But it worries me when we don't move beyond that initial phase. So I just wanted to say, me too, about the inquiry cycle. And I can't even remember what the question was. So
I don't know either. I kind of lost track. But it's just the idea of identifying the thinking that you want, and then you look for the tools that are appropriate. Many points, you have some educators are looking at the book. Oh, I'm going to think, pair, share, and then I'm going to give one, get one. But wait a minute, what's the outcome that you actually want in terms of thinking?
Yes.
And there is that, the transition of looking at the tools and then realizing, wait a minute, you have to identify the thinking. Mark, any comments on what you just heard?
Well, one of the things I was thinking about was this idea that we've often described thinking routines in this way, that thinking routines are tools that get used over and over again. They're structures that give space for that thinking, for students to individually grapple with and document, discuss their thinking. So they're tools, they're structures to grow patterns of behavior.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
like see, think, wonder, the routine, but the ultimate goal is getting my students seeing, thinking, wondering as routine.
Mm.
And so that pattern of behavior bit was on my mind, especially as Kath was just talking, because as I've often thought about their tools and structures to grow patterns of behavior, maybe in this online world, I've been finding myself like with the professional learning, the schools that I'm still consulting with and working with in lots of ways, it's like, okay, what's the pattern of behavior that I want them to engage in?
Mm.
And then what are the tools and structures that they already have in place that we
Mhm.
can make that happen? Or is this a moment to create a tool or structure? But it's that, I think, really coming back to, and it's been said already by the two others here, what kind of thinking do we wish to make routine that's going to serve their inquiry, their
Mm.
curiosity, their learning really, really well? And then just using those tools, those practices in service of that purpose.
Mm.
Yeah. Well, it's thinking about, yes, you want teachers to have some new practices to do, but both your work goes deeper than that, and what would you say, if someone said, we have 500 people on this webinar today, and they're asking you, okay, Kath, Mark, Ron, what would you say is the core of your work in terms of both the students and the teacher? And I'll let anybody go. Just whoever wants to start. Go for it.
Oh, what's it?
Core, really the core, because we're talking about, yes, we want teachers to have new practices, but as you said, it goes deeper than that. It's not just going through the routine. So we're looking at what really, I used the word core. What is the core of your work in terms of both the student and the teacher?
I'd say engagement and empowerment for both the student and the teacher. We want students to be engaged. We want them to feel empowered, develop that sense of independence of who they are as thinkers and learners. But we also want that for teachers.
Mm.
There's we want teachers to feel like, they are not kind of the masters to their curriculum, but that they have that freedom to kind of navigate within this really interesting creative space. So I might say that engagement and empowerment.
Mm.
Nice. Who would try again?
Go, Mark.
Well, the core, as soon as it's the core, I have to settle on one thing. It's like Sophie's choice.
I was going to say it's a Sophie's choice moment.
I was thinking, I know we were just speaking about routines, but I'm coming back to Ron has helped many of the people on this call and around the world think about the forces that shape classroom culture. And I think this past year, more than any, is paying attention to the cultural force of interactions and opportunities.
Mm.
I think that has come up in my mind right now as you were talking, like, what's the core of our work? Like, what are the interactions that, because every classroom space, whether we're in person, at a distance, wherever we are, there's still going to be an interaction that goes down. So what interactions are we promoting, and what messages do those interactions send to our learners and to the teachers about what's valued, what's important here? And I think the opportunities, that's another thing. What are the opportunities we're able to create so that we can let people live into their full capacity as thinkers, as inquirers? I often think, what are some of the things in our systems that we could just get out of the way so that people really can thrive? And so I was just thinking that in the core, some of these other cultural forces have really come to light, especially in the past year for me.
Thank you. And Kath?
I'm thinking about core in a slightly different way here, but I keep coming back to this notion of identity, that I think for me, when I'm thinking about what's the core of my work, I feel like it's something around how the educator sees themselves. And it goes back to what I said earlier about our bigger ideas about what's the purpose of school, what am I here to do? Which then goes to, how do I see myself? So as an educator, what are the metaphors that I carry for myself? And am I, as the wonderful late great. Ken Robinson used a lot, you know, am I a gardener here? Am I creating conditions? And getting to know who these people are that I have the great privilege of working with each day, as in the students, and how do I create the conditions for each of them to thrive? You know, how do I see myself? Who am I as a teacher? And having maybe the core of my work is being curious about how that can grow and evolve and change over time. That my identity personally as a teacher in the early 80s is very different to the identity that I feel I now have as an educator. And I think the identity is also about our learners. So how do they see who they are? And what does it mean for me to be a learner how do my children see themselves? So I'm really interested in that. I'm interested in how our identities as learners and as educators shape what we do. How we think about ourselves shapes what we do, say, behave in the classroom. So maybe there's something there about what's at the core. I'm sounding a bit too highfalutin, I think, but anyway, it's just where I'm at right now. I've had 2 coffees today. What can I say?
Yeah, you know, everybody, you know, the whole conversation so far, I think everybody who's on this webinar is such a true supporter, and they absolutely adhere to what your passions are. But there's always some colleagues that they might be working with who might not have that same enthusiasm. You know, I look at the power of the thinking routines, the inquiry cycle. But I guess my question is to this. I guess this is a 2-point question to help those colleagues who are with us today. How do they work with those peers that, number one, might find it challenging to embrace the passions that you have? Not embrace your passion, but I'm talking about thinking about thinking. And if you could give a suggestion, one suggestion when you reflect on how might we be able to support teachers who are less secure or maybe less confident in moving with the idea, and you might be thinking, how can any teacher not support the idea of supporting thinking? Then you're in the wrong field. But you know what I'm saying in terms of supporting colleagues who might be less confident in working this way. I know this is a big question, but maybe a suggestion to help those who are with us today of how do we approach it? What would you suggest in working with those colleagues who might feel they have some challenges in implementing these approaches?
Ooh.
It's a biggie.
Well, I guess one very, kind of simple piece of advice there is, everyone likes to feel competent, and when you make people feel incompetent, they're going to put up a wall. And so saying, here's this great thing I'm doing, why aren't you doing the same great thing, isn't going to bring people in. But if you appeal to people and say, I'm trying something new, I'd love to run this by you to get your ideas on it. Here's what I'm thinking about, and invite people in as your collaborator. Ask for their competence. Ask for their advice. When people feel like they're collaborating with you, that you aren't trying to fix them, the people are much more likely to engage in that. So that would be the stance I would take. Help people to feel competent in what they do. Help people to feel that they can offer advice, that they can be in part, that maybe they don't know everything about a culture of thinking, making things visible, inquiry, but invite them in to, as a sounding board, to listen to you, to get their ideas, and I think that sets a groundwork then for collaboration. And when people feel like they can then collaborate with you, then they're much more likely to take on some of your ideas.
Something I was thinking, if I could jump into, I think this past year has taught many of us more than anything is a little more empathy for others. I'm pretty sure I was the teacher when I was still teaching years ago, that when I was so excited about things once I had figured out understanding, oh, I'm so excited now. And then I would write off other colleagues as being jaded or being real sticks in the mud. And I really regret that I did that, because I think now, my 50-year-old self rather than my 25-year-old self,
Oh, you
looking
young
back,
thing, you.
I lied. I'm not 50. Anyway, no,
25.
I'm whatever. These filters are wonderful.
I love these pictures. I know. I'm getting a
I can never go back to in person. No, people. Anyway, we've got just a short time. So what I want to say is, looking back, I really regret that I wrote people off, because probably, even though they maybe were being negative or appeared to be jaded, probably underneath it was a lot of fear. And it connects a little bit to what Kath said about identity for me. To really, for someone to feel like, I think I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing as a teacher, and then you're asking me to do something else, and I don't know if I'm going to be good at that. And so there's some fear there. Sometimes fear manifests as jadedness or negative comments or snide remarks or whatnot. But when I start to think, if somebody's legitimately fearful, and maybe it ties to their identity or things, I can be more patient with that. I can start to think, well, what's it take to help anybody ever get unafraid? And I think it's ongoing, sustained conversations. It's making the barriers to entry pretty low. People don't want to be proselytized. I say this a lot, crusades probably only felt good for the crusaders, not the crusaded. And so how do we just kind of approach people with humility? There's always people that want advocacy and support, and start there and then grow from there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I would just say, I want to echo this idea of, I love that, approaching people with humility. I think the older I get, the more I understand about that, and about bringing that true curiosity and inquiry stance, particularly to those that might appear to be in direct opposition with what I'm doing, or that are pushing back most strongly. If I can learn to be curious about that rather than defensive, and I think I've gotten better at that over the years, I learn, and we start to move towards each other. And I think trying to find, the thing I often think in working with a group of teachers is that if we have time enough to talk, we end up figuring out that we're pretty much all on about the same thing most of the time. At our core, talking about the core, at our core, we want to do the right thing by our students. We have our students' best interests at heart. And I think if we can tap into that, and and I think there's a bit about leadership here too that we don't have time to go into, but that creating that broader culture of curiosity, intellectual humility, and teacher inquiry, that we start to understand we have a community of experts in the room, albeit with different ways of doing things, and that I always think someone's always really good at something. I went into a school the other day, and some people in the room will have done this, where in the staff room there was one of those lovely boards which had every single teacher, and it was like, if you want to know more about, or if you want to know how to come talk to me. And every single person in the whole school community, not just the teachers, but everyone, had something there. And it was like, see me if you want to know about this. And I thought, yes, this is beautiful. This is building that sense of competence you spoke about before, Ron. And I guess the final thing I have to say, because it's so dear to me, is that I think another way to support people is to be in classrooms. And I know at the moment that's not always easy, but with my work, I love doing learning labs. I know the two of you do that too. And I think when we sit with people in their learning spaces with their students and say, let's do this and let's see what we notice, that's one of the best ways to start to have those conversations that grow the learning, rather than purely kind of talking about it in theory, actually getting in there and doing it, that's where the shift happens. So I guess at a school level, not talking about the work we do, but in working with your colleagues, jumping into each other's learning spaces, teaching together, and then treating that as an act of inquiry and using those routines to grow your own thinking about your students' learning. It's a great way to find your common ground and grow.
You know, I'm thinking of a word that Ron used initially, the idea of grace, working with each other with a sense of grace. I know we're out of time, but I just want to, before we conclude, I just want to hear quickly, can each one of you share with everyone, what are you working on now? Or, you know, what are you looking forward to in terms of what's on the horizon in terms of your work? So before we conclude, give everyone a little tidbit or a little teaser of what you're working on.
Well, we have been working on, for the past 2 years, the kind of new part of our research is called Cultures of Thinking in Action. And we've really identified kind of 10 core principles. It's not that they're out of the blue, because some of them go back, 15, 20 years. They've always been a part of that, but really recognizing these as really foundational elements in terms of a teacher's mindset, in terms of a teacher's stance, and beliefs. And so really beginning to articulate those. And so that's where we're focused. Just launched a new website around that, which is just culturesofthinking.org with dashes in there. Sorry. And then, yeah.
Wonderful. Oh, I can't wait for that in action. Wonderful. Kath, what do you have coming up? Anything traveling?
Oh, traveling? No way. Oh, but yeah. In Australia, yeah, I know. We're very fortunate. It helps being an island at the bottom of the world, Nancy. We're far away from people, and while that's problematic a lot of the time because it takes forever to get places, in terms of this pandemic, it's helped protect us a little. So yes, all apart from Perth right now. Sorry, Perth, but yeah, I have been back in classrooms, so that has been a joy, I have to say. What I'm working on right now is my current book is about what I'm calling personal inquiry, but it's just called Getting Personal with Inquiry Learning. So I've been working on this for about 10 years, not the book, but actually almost the book. I take a long time to write books, but how to support children to develop journeys of inquiry around the things that matter strongly to them, in addition to the things that we inquire into together or that we project. So that's the current book, and I've got a couple of other little projects that are keeping me very busy too. So, but personal inquiry's my thing right now.
Nice. And Mark, what's ahead for you?
Well, I'm first going to say hi to my friend. I want to say hi to my mom for being here tonight. Thank you, Mom. No, actually, she doesn't even know that I've been here this whole pandemic. But I have seen my friends Jan, Shirley, Michelle. I've seen people in the chat. People that I know.
Same. It's like hi. So thank you, everyone.
Hi to all my friends. It's the first time I've seen people for a year. But beyond working with Ron on and continuing to be a longtime collaborator with him on the Cultures of Thinking and Action work, Ron and I are always thinking, and it sounds like Kath is thinking about this too, no surprise, but the leadership piece in all of this.
Yeah.
And what are the lessons we're learning from leaders who really advance these ideas? And so watch this space, because I think there'll be coming things from the two of us, our friend Kath, or who knows, maybe the three of us together might tackle that one.
Let's work on that. Let's work on doing something together. Imagine being in the same actual room. Yeah, that would be great.
Inquiry Summit. Shonal, that's a summit. Absolutely. We'll be in Luxembourg. We'll have champagne, things like
Oh, I can only but dream.
I know. That'd be a while before we could do that.
I think we're coming to a close, so I'll let you say goodbye to everybody.
Yes, thank you.
Aw.
Thank you, Mark, Ron, and Kath. That was brilliant. I know the chat's been going crazy.
Yeah, really.
So much of your experience, your thoughts. That's just been super. And Nancy, couldn't do this without you. You're too good. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you all for being here. We've had more than 500 people here, so thank you all. And please stay safe. And we'll be having a few more webinars coming up next week. It's Kath is going to be interviewing Guy Claxton on his new book. So
I'm
please look
excited.
out for that.
I get to be Nancy next week.
Wow.
So I've got some hot tips today. I'm gonna go the shirt with the high collar. That's a good look. Yeah.
Lighting's really important. Okay, so
Okay. Thanks, Nancy.
So thank you all. Thanks. I know it's.
Thanks, Chanel.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, everyone.
Cool.
Thanks,
That was
everyone.
fun. Thanks for
Enjoyed
joining
that.
us.
Bye.
Me
Nice
too.
seeing you, Kath.
Bye.